It was 8:30 in the morning on February 23, 1996, in Millersville, Pennsylvania. Two boys grabbed their backpacks. They kissed their mother goodbye. They walked out the front door of their one-story brick home. They were headed to school. It was a normal Friday morning. The street was quiet and suburban. It was an upper-middle-class neighborhood. The boys did not notice the vehicles. Black Chevrolet Suburbans were parked 3 houses down and 4 houses down. More vehicles were around the corner. They did not see the agents watching through tinted windows. The agents were counting down the minutes. At 8:32 in the morning, the boys turned the corner. They went out of sight. Federal Bureau of Investigation Special Agent John Whiteside spoke into his radio. He commanded all units to move in. More than 12 agents emerged from the vehicles. They wore tactical gear and bulletproof vests. Their weapons were drawn. They surrounded the house on all sides. The front door was covered, the back door was covered, every window was also covered. Inside, 50-year-old Robert Stephen Lipka sat at his kitchen table. His coffee was going cold, a newspaper was spread out in front of him. He was wearing casual clothes. He wore sweatpants and a t-shirt. There was nothing unusual about this morning. It was no different from any other day in his quiet Pennsylvania life. Then the doorbell rang hard and insistently. Federal agents commanded him to open up. Lipka froze. The coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. He knew that sound. He had been waiting for it and dreading it for 30 years. The agents did not wait for an answer. The front door crashed open. Agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation commanded him to get on the ground. They told him to place his hands where they could see them. Lipka did not resist. He did not run. He slowly set down the coffee cup. He raised his hands above his head. His face showed no surprise. It showed only resignation and the terrible certainty that this moment had finally arrived. They cuffed his hands behind his back. They read him his rights. Robert Stephen Lipka was informed that he was under arrest for conspiracy to commit espionage. He was charged with selling classified documents to the Soviet Union. He was also charged with betraying the United States of America. The handcuffs clicked shut. His freedom ended. A 30-year secret died in a quiet suburban kitchen on a Friday morning in February. However, this story did not start in 1996. It started 3 decades earlier. It began in the heart of America's most secretive intelligence agency. The story began with a 19-year-old Army clerk. He had access to the nation's deepest secrets. This raised a simple question that would haunt investigators for 30 years. How did a low-level clerk walk out of the National Security Agency with some of the most classified documents in American history? How? Did he sell them to the Soviet Union for $30,000? How did he get away with it for 3 decades? The answer lay hidden in an attic. It lay in Soviet maps and notes that a former wife would discover years after their divorce. It also lay in classified archives. A defector would smuggle these out of Moscow in milk containers. He would then bury them in his garden. It also involved an elaborate Federal Bureau of Investigation sting operation. This operation nearly fell apart over a chess piece. Robert Stephen Lipka was born on June 16, 1945, in Madison, Wisconsin. The war in Europe had just ended. The atomic age was dawning. The Cold War had not yet begun, but the pieces were falling into place. Lipka grew up in an ordinary American family. Nothing in his childhood suggested betrayal. Nothing marked him as a future spy. He graduated from Cumberland Valley High School in 1963. The Berlin Wall had been up for 2 years. The Cuban Missile Crisis had brought the world to the brink of nuclear war just months earlier. The Cold War was heating up. The military needed young men with technical aptitudes. Lipka enlisted in the United States Army shortly after his graduation. He was 18 years old. He was smart enough, reliable enough, and unremarkable enough. The Army assigned him to intelligence work. In 1964, at age 19, Private Robert Lipka reported to Fort Meade, Maryland. This was home of the National Security Agency. It was the most secretive intelligence organization in the United States government. It was more secretive than the Central Intelligence Agency. It was more classified than anything most Americans knew existed. The National Security Agency's mission was signals intelligence. This involved intercepting foreign communications and breaking enemy codes. It also protected American communications from foreign eyes. During the Vietnam War era, the National Security Agency monitored Soviet radio traffic. It tracked troop movements worldwide. It also decrypted classified messages between communist nations. The intelligence flowing through Fort Meade was extraordinarily valuable. It went directly to the White House and to the Pentagon. It also went to North Atlantic Treaty Organization allies. This information could either win or lose wars. Lipka was assigned to the Priority Materials Branch, which was the Central Communications Room. His job was simple. He was to remove highly classified documents from teleprinters and sort them. Then he would disseminate them throughout the agency. He also delivered them to the correct desks, offices, and analysts. It was clerical work. It was low-level and routine. But it required a top-secret security clearance and code word-level access. This was because Private Lipka handled everything. He handled daily intelligence summaries and weekly reports to the White House. He also processed information on United States troop movements. Throughout the world, he saw communications among North Atlantic Treaty Organization allies. Additionally, he handled National Security Agency electronic eavesdropping targets and Soviet missile telemetry data. He received order of battle information. This signals intelligence revealed exactly how the United States was monitoring the Soviet Union. It showed what they knew, how they knew it, and where the vulnerabilities were. Lipka was 19 years old. He made roughly $6,000 a year in Army salary. He handled documents that could alter the course of the Cold War, and nobody thought twice about it. He was just a clerk, just a kid sorting papers. He was just another face in the sprawling National Security Agency headquarters. The security guards checked briefcases when employees left. They also checked bags and packages. But they did not search bodies. That was the vulnerability. It was the opening. This was how a 19-year-old Army private would become one of the most damaging spies in National Security Agency history. It was September 1965. Lipka had been at the National Security Agency for 1 year. He knew the routines. He understood the security procedures. He had identified the weaknesses. And he had made a decision. He needed money. On a Tuesday afternoon in September, Lipka drove from Fort Meade to Washington, District of Columbia. He drove to 16th Street Northwest. This was the location of the Soviet embassy. It was a white limestone building with the hammer and sickle flag. He parked 2 blocks away. He walked to the front entrance and rang the bell. When the door opened, he spoke clearly. He stated his name was Robert Lipka. He explained that he was an Army clerk at the National Security Agency. He added that he was responsible for handling and shredding highly classified documents. He said he could supply them with a wealth of material. Finally, he stated that he was there to volunteer his services. The Komitet Gosudarstvenoi Bezopasnosti officer at the door did not slam it in his face. He did not call the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Instead, he invited Lipka inside to a secure room. Other officers joined them there. They questioned him and tested him. They verified his access. They confirmed his position at the National Security Agency. Within 1 hour, they had recruited him. They gave him a code name, Krotin. This was the Russian word for mole. They provided him with equipment, including a Minox camera. This was a compact device favored by Soviet intelligence for photographing documents. They taught him tradecraft, such as dead drops and signal sites. They showed him how to avoid surveillance. They also taught him how to communicate without being detected. They told him they wanted everything. They wanted anything he could get his hands on. They also told him what he would receive in return, which was cash. It was $500 to $1,000 per package delivered. Lipka returned to Fort Meade the next day. He returned to his desk in the Priority Materials Branch. He also returned to sorting classified documents. However, now he was looking at them differently. He was selecting them. He was memorizing which ones were most valuable. The operation began immediately. Lipka would arrive at work in his Army uniform. He would process documents throughout the day. Then before leaving, he would select the most sensitive materials. These included top-secret reports destined for the White House. He also selected intelligence on Soviet capabilities. He even took National Security Agency collection methods. These revealed exactly how the United States was eavesdropping on communist communications. He would fold the documents. He would tuck them inside his shirt. He would tape packages to his torso. He also hid papers inside his hat. Sometimes he would wrap documents around his leg under his uniform trousers. Then he would walk out past security. The guards checked his briefcase and found nothing. They never suspected that the documents were leaving on his body. Once outside Fort Meade, Lipka would drive to predetermined locations. These locations included parks around Washington, wooded areas in Maryland, and restaurant bathrooms. These were dead-drop sites where he would leave packages for his Komitet Gosudarstvenoi Bezopasnosti handlers. For example, he once taped a package of classified documents inside a toilet tank in a Maryland restaurant. His handlers would retrieve the material. They would photograph everything. Then they would return the package to a different location. Lipka would collect it. He would return the documents to the National Security Agency the next day. He would put them back in circulation. Nobody noticed they had been gone. Nobody suspected anything was wrong. The Komitet Gosudarstvenoi Bezopasnosti was ecstatic. According to Oleg Kalugin, who would later become a Komitet Gosudarstvenoi Bezopasnosti Major General, Lipka was giving them exactly what they needed. Kalugin would later write in his memoir that the young soldier was involved in shredding and destroying National Security Agency documents. He stated that Lipka could supply them with a wealth of material. Lipka gave them whatever he got his hands on. He often had little idea what he was turning over. But the Komitet Gosudarstvenoi Bezopasnosti knew. They knew the value of every page. They also knew the value of every report and every document. These materials came from the Priority Materials Branch at the National Security Agency. The intelligence Lipka provided allowed the Soviets to understand American signals intelligence capabilities. It allowed them to adjust their own communication security. They could counter United States eavesdropping operations. It also helped them know what the Americans knew about Soviet troop movements, missile programs, and military capabilities. The damage was extraordinary. The Komitet Gosudarstvenoi Bezopasnosti made contact with Lipka approximately 50 times over the next 2 years. Sometimes he would meet his handler, known to him as Ivan, in person. These were brief encounters and quick exchanges. More often he would use dead drops. This was sophisticated tradecraft designed to minimize the risk of detection. Each time he delivered a package, Lipka received payment. It was $500. Sometimes it was $1,000. He received cash in unmarked bills. It was roughly 10 times his annual Army salary. The money was good. It was very good for a 20-year-old soldier. But Lipka was not motivated by ideology. He did not believe in communism. He did not sympathize with the Soviet cause. He would later tell Federal Bureau of Investigation agents exactly why he did it. He described his motivation as pure green greed. He worked strictly for money, nothing more and nothing less. In 1966, while actively spying for the Komitet Gosudarstvenoi Bezopasnosti, Lipka married Patricia Davis. She was a young woman from Baltimore. She was a nurse. She was smart and observant. They met during his time at Fort Meade. They married quickly. They were like many young couples in the mid-60s. Patricia noticed things. She noticed strange things. Her new husband had money, more money than an Army private should have. He would come home late sometimes. He was evasive about where he had been. She would find documents in his car. These were papers that looked official. They had classified markings she did not understand. When she asked about them, Lipka would brush off her questions. He would tell her it was work stuff and nothing important. He also told her not to worry about it, but Patricia worried. She noticed the way he would stuff papers inside his shirt before leaving for the day. She noticed the way he would drive circuitous routes home. She also noticed the way he would act nervous and jumpy. He was always looking over his shoulder. She suspected something. However, she did not know what it was. Not yet. The marriage would last less than 1 decade, but the secrets Patricia observed would resurface decades later. This happened in ways that Lipka never imagined. By early 1967, Lipka had been spying for 18 months. He had delivered classified documents to the KGB dozens of times. He received approximately $27,000 in total payments. However, he was growing dissatisfied and greedy. He wanted more money. He demanded higher payments. Lipka threatened to cut off contact if the KGB did not increase his compensation. The KGB refused his demands. The KGB had clear payment structures and standard rates for sources. They would not be extorted by a 21-year-old Army clerk. Furthermore, Lipka was also growing nervous and paranoid. The security risk was increasing. He had been doing this for 2 years. The longer it continued, the greater the chance of getting caught. His Army enlistment was ending soon. He would be discharged. He considered leaving the NSA and going to college. He wanted to start fresh and escape the constant fear of discovery. In August of 1967, Lipka made his decision. He told his KGB handlers he was quitting. His military service was ending. He would leave the NSA to attend Millersville University of Pennsylvania. He would not be spying anymore. The KGB tried to change his mind. They offered him more money. They suggested he stay in the military and re-enlist. They wanted him to continue at the NSA because the intelligence he provided was too valuable to lose. But Lipka refused. To discourage further attempts at recontact, he sent a final message to his handlers. It was a lie designed to make them leave him alone. He claimed he had been a double agent all along. He stated he was working for United States intelligence. Everything he had given them had been part of an American counterintelligence operation. The KGB did not believe him. According to Vasili Mitrokhin, the KGB archivist, the Soviets knew Lipka was lying. Mitrokhin would later defect with thousands of pages of secret files. The documents Lipka had provided were too important. They were too classified and too real. No American intelligence service would have authorized that level of compromise. However, the KGB respected his decision for now. They filed away his information and kept his name in their records. His code name was Croton. He was the mole who had supplied NSA secrets from 1965 to 1967. He had received approximately $27,000. He had walked away clean. The KGB did not give up entirely. Both their diplomatic officers and their illegals tried to recontact Lipka intermittently for at least 11 years. These undercover agents operated without diplomatic protection. This continued through the 1970s. They used subtle approaches and sent coded messages. These were attempts to reactivate a valuable source. Lipka ignored them all. He had gotten out. He had escaped. He believed he had gotten away with it forever. In August of 1967, Robert Lipka left Fort Meade for the last time. He was honorably discharged from the United States Army. There was no investigation, no suspicion, and no consequences. He enrolled at Millersville University in Pennsylvania, just outside Lancaster. It was a small, quiet, safe, and anonymous college town. He was free. However, there was a problem. Lipka did not leave empty-handed. When he departed the NSA, he took classified documents with him. He had squirreled away a stash of materials during his time at Fort Meade. He thought these documents might be valuable later. He saw them as insurance or leverage, or perhaps it was just greed. According to prosecutors who would later investigate him, Lipka attempted to meet with KGB agents at least twice. He tried this after leaving the NSA, once in 1968 and again in 1970. He was attempting to sell the documents he had taken. The meetings never materialized. The KGB may not have trusted him after his double agent claim. Alternatively, the attempts may have failed for operational reasons. Either way, Lipka kept the documents. They were hidden, safe, and stored somewhere nobody would think to look. He used the money he had received from the KGB to finance his college education. $27,000 paid for tuition, books, and living expenses. It was more than most college students had. Lipka studied at Millersville from 1967 to 1972, a period of 5 years. He was a campus activist. He wrote op-ed pieces for the student newspaper. He took strong political positions on various issues. Professors remembered him as argumentative. He was libertarian in his views and hostile to government authority. This was somewhat ironic for a man who had betrayed that government for cash. In the summer of 1972, Lipka graduated. He briefly worked as a high school history teacher. However, that did not last. He essentially dropped out of the workforce in his late 20s. Instead, Lipka opened the Liberty Coin Shop in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He became a coin dealer. He bought and sold rare coins. This was work that suited him. It offered flexible hours and involved cash transactions. There was no boss, no structure, and no oversight. He spent much of his time at off-track betting facilities in York, Pennsylvania, about 30 minutes from his home. He enjoyed betting on horses and gambling. His two obsessions were trading coins and placing bets. He lived on disability payments from a chronic back injury. The coin shop provided supplemental income. It was not much, but it was enough. Lipka remarried. His first marriage to Patricia had ended in angry divorce. She had filed citing physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. The divorce was bitter and acrimonious. Patricia had seen, known, and suspected things during their marriage, but she had said nothing, not yet. Lipka's second wife was named Deborah. They had 2 sons together. The family lived in a modest one-story brick home in Millersville. It was a suburban neighborhood on a middle-class street. Lipka was just another dad, another husband, and another small business owner in a Pennsylvania college town. His neighbors thought he was normal and unremarkable. He was a little odd, perhaps, but they found nothing suspicious, nothing that suggested he was a former Soviet spy. The years passed, 1975, 1980, 1985, 1990. The Cold War ended. The Soviet Union collapsed. Lipka kept living his quiet life. He continued trading coins, betting on horses, and raising his sons. He believed he had gotten away with it forever. But in the spring of 1992, something happened 7,000 miles away. This event would shatter Lipka's comfortable anonymity. In Moscow, a 69-year-old man named Vasili Mitrokhin boarded an overnight train bound for Latvia. The Soviet Union had collapsed 4 months earlier. The borders of the new Russian Federation were chaotic and security was lax. It was the perfect time for Mitrokhin to defect. Mitrokhin had worked for the KGB for more than 3 decades. He had started in 1948 as a foreign intelligence officer. He served on undercover assignments overseas in the 1950s. However, after mishandling an operational assignment in 1956, he had been pulled from field work. He was relegated to desk duty and assigned to the archives. He was told he would never work in the field again. Some people might have been bitter or angry. However, Mitrokhin turned his demotion into the most valuable defection in Cold War history. In June of 1972, the same year Lipka was graduating from Millersville University, Mitrokhin was given a special assignment. The KGB was moving its archives. These were relocated from the Lubyanka building in central Moscow to new headquarters in Yasenevo district. Mitrokhin was responsible for checking and sealing 300,000 files. For 12 years, from 1972 to 1984, Mitrokhin had unlimited access to the most sensitive KGB files. These files included operations going back to 1917. They covered decades of espionage. Thousands of agents were documented. Operations in Europe, Africa, Latin America, Asia, and the United States were also detailed. Mitrokhin did not just read the files, he copied them. Every day for 12 years, he would scribble handwritten notes about what he read. He noted names, code names, operations, handlers, payments, and methods. He would fold the small pieces of paper and hide them in his shoes, inside his socks, or in his pockets. Then he would smuggle them out of KGB headquarters. He took them to his dacha, his country cottage outside Moscow. There he would transcribe his notes into more detailed records. He would hide these in milk containers, bury them in his garden, and store them under the floorboards. The archive grew page after page, year after year. It amounted to 25,000 pages of handwritten notes. This was the most complete and extensive intelligence archive ever compiled by a single source. Mitrokhin was not doing this for money. He was not being blackmailed. He did not particularly enjoy the West. He was disillusioned. The 1956 speech by Khrushchev denouncing Stalin had shaken him. The crushing of the Prague Spring in 1968 had disgusted him. The corruption and moral bankruptcy of the late Soviet system had convinced him. He believed that all KGB operations needed to be exposed. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Mitrokhin saw his opportunity. In March of 1992, he arrived at the American Embassy in Riga, Latvia. He had samples of his archive with him. He explained what he possessed. This included decades of KGB files, thousands of operations, and hundreds of agents. The CIA officers at the embassy did not believe him. They thought he was a crank and a fantasist. They believed the documents could be fakes. They told him to return later, then dismissed him. Mitrokhin did not give up. He went to the British embassy and asked to speak to someone in authority. A young diplomat there, fluent in Russian, immediately recognized the value of his material. She contacted MI6, Britain's secret intelligence service. They arranged a meeting and evaluated the material. They realized they were looking at the intelligence coup of the century. In November of 1992, MI6 exfiltrated Mitrokhin and his family from Russia. They brought 6 trunks filled with his archive. It contained thousands of pages of notes. These notes detailed operations dating back decades, including American, British, and other spies all over the world. Over the next months, MI6 shared portions of the archive with Allied intelligence services. In August of 1992, just months after Mitrokhin's defection, the FBI received files relating to American sources. One of those files was about an NSA clerk. His code name was Croton. His real name was Robert Lipka. Lipka had sold classified documents to the KGB from 1965 to 1967. He had received approximately $27,000. He had walked away clean 30 years ago. He was now living in Millersville, Pennsylvania. The FBI investigation began immediately. Special Agent John W. Whiteside III was assigned as case agent. His first task was verification. He needed to confirm if Robert Lipka actually existed and if he was still alive. Whiteside also needed to corroborate Mitrokhin's information. Whiteside started with basic research. He went to the library in Lancaster County. He looked through city directories and found a Robert Lipka. This Lipka was a former United States Army soldier living in Millersville. He worked as a coin dealer, was married, and had 2 sons. He was still alive and still in the area. The investigation was now active. Whiteside coordinated with the National Security Agency. The agency pulled Lipka's personnel files. The files confirmed his work at Fort Meade from 1964 to 1967. They also confirmed his assignment to the Priority Materials Branch. Furthermore, his top-secret clearance and access to highly classified documents were verified. Everything Mitrokhin had written proved accurate. However, merely confirming Lipka's background was not enough. The Federal Bureau of Investigation needed concrete evidence. They required proof that could be used in court. This included testimony, admissions, and other solid findings. At this point, Whiteside had an idea. His initial research revealed something interesting about Lipka's personal life. Lipka had been married in 1966, in the middle of his espionage activities. The marriage had ended in an angry divorce. His former wife, Patricia, had accused Lipka of abuse. The allegations included physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Whiteside pulled the divorce records and read the allegations. He realized an angry former wife might provide information about her husband's past actions. Whiteside found Patricia. She was working as a nurse at a hospital in Maryland. Patricia was remarried and living a quiet life. Whiteside and his co-case agent Dan Brennan arranged a meeting. They approached her at work. They explained the need to speak with her about her former husband. A week later, they met at her townhouse. Her current husband was present during the meeting. The 2 Federal Bureau of Investigation agents sat on one sofa. Patricia and her husband sat on another sofa facing them. Whiteside immediately knew they would get no information with her husband present. The phone rang, and her husband left the room to answer it. Patricia then leaned forward. Patricia quietly stated she knew their questions. The Federal Bureau of Investigation agents listened. Patricia had been married to Robert Lipka from 1966 to the mid-1970s. During those years, she had observed strange and suspicious activities. She had found classified documents in their home. These included papers with security markings and materials clearly from the National Security Agency. She had seen Lipka hide items in their attic. These included maps, documents, and papers in Cyrillic script. Some were Russian language materials. She had asked him about them. He had told her they were work-related historical materials, research for something specific. She had believed him at first. However, the suspicious behavior continued. This included late-night absences, unexplained money, and paranoia. By the time their marriage ended, Patricia suspected her husband was involved in something illegal. She believed it involved classified information. However, she had no proof and no way to confirm her suspicions. After the divorce, she had moved on. She started a new life, putting Robert Lipka behind her. This changed when 2 Federal Bureau of Investigation agents knocked on her door in 1993. Patricia agreed to cooperate fully. She provided detailed information about Lipka's activities during their marriage. Her information included the documents she had seen and the behavior she had observed. She also reported things he had said when he thought she was not paying attention. She became the cooperating witness whom the Federal Bureau of Investigation would later protect. The witness whose identity would need to remain classified was Patricia. Her testimony would have required disguise if the case went to trial. Patricia's information was crucial, but it was historical and decades old. The Federal Bureau of Investigation needed current evidence, something happening now. This evidence would give them leverage. Therefore, Whiteside decided to use a false flag operation. In May 1993, the Federal Bureau of Investigation launched one of the most sophisticated sting operations in counterintelligence history. Federal Bureau of Investigation Special Agent Dmitry Drojinsky was selected for the undercover role. He was born in Russia, fluent in Russian, and experienced in counterintelligence operations. Drojinsky would pose as a Russian intelligence officer. He would not claim to be from the Committee for State Security, which had been broken up after the Soviet collapse and renamed the Foreign Intelligence Service. Instead, he would pose as an officer from the Main Intelligence Directorate, Soviet military intelligence. The Main Intelligence Directorate had stayed intact after the Soviet Union's collapse. It retained the same name and structure. This gave Drojinsky a solid cover story, as he was from the Main Intelligence Directorate. The Committee for State Security files on Lipka were in Moscow. Drojinsky did not have all the details. However, he knew enough. He knew Lipka's code name, the operation, and that Lipka had been a valuable agent. The Federal Bureau of Investigation hoped this approach would give Drojinsky room for mistakes. If he got details wrong, he could claim to be from the Main Intelligence Directorate asking for clarification. The team prepared carefully. They studied everything about Lipka's original operation. They studied the dead drops, the signal sites, and the payment amounts. They reviewed Kalugin's memoir, which had mentioned Lipka without using his real name. They read Mitrokhin's notes, building a complete picture of what Lipka had done 3 decades earlier. On May 12, 1993, Drojinsky made the first contact. This was a phone call to Lipka's home near Lancaster. The call came in the late morning. A man speaking with a slight Russian accent identified himself as Sergei Nikitin. He claimed to be a Russian intelligence officer working in Washington. He stated he had access to Lipka's old Committee for State Security file. Nikitin wanted to meet to discuss the work Lipka had done decades ago. He also wanted to discuss compensation Lipka was still owed. Lipka was immediately suspicious, asking about Nikitin's identity, how he got the number, and what he was discussing. However, he did not hang up or refuse outright. Drojinsky detected tension and fear in Lipka's voice. However, he also sensed interest in the possibility of money. They arranged to meet 15 minutes later at the Lancaster Comfort Inn. Lipka drove there in his blue-green Chevrolet van. Drojinsky was waiting outside, and they sat in Lipka's van in the parking lot. Drojinsky explained that things had changed in Russia. He said the old Committee for State Security was reorganized. However, the Russian Federation still honored its obligations to former agents. Lipka was owed money, compensation for the valuable work he had done at the National Security Agency. Lipka listened, asked questions, and remained guarded. Then he made a demand, asking for his code word. Drojinsky had not expected this. The code word was not in the files the Secret Intelligence Service had shared. Mitrokhin's notes did not include it. Drojinsky stalled, explaining the files were in Moscow. He stated he was based in Washington and did not have all the details. He claimed he was there to verify information with Lipka. Lipka was not satisfied. He took his finger and traced letters in the dust on his dashboard, forming R-. He demanded Drojinsky complete the word, then erased it. Lipka stated that unless Drojinsky could provide the code word at their next meeting, he would say nothing. The meeting ended and Lipka drove away. Drojinsky reported back to Whiteside. The operation was hanging by a thread. They had no idea what the code word was. If they could not provide it, Lipka would disappear and the case would die. The Federal Bureau of Investigation team met at the motel that afternoon. Whiteside, Drojinsky, and National Security Agency representatives were present. They reviewed everything, pondering what the code word could be. They knew it started with the letter R. They wondered if it was 4 letters or more, or the beginning of a phrase. They brainstormed and guessed possible answers. Then Drojinsky remembered something from the first meeting. When Lipka had been talking, he had made references to chess. He mentioned chess strategy and chess pieces, using chess as a metaphor for intelligence work. Chess was a Russian game, and the Committee for State Security loved chess analogies. A chess piece starting with R was rook. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had no other options. It was an educated guess, but still only a guess. The next morning they met again, using the same parking lot and blue-green Chevrolet van. Lipka climbed in, looking at Drujinski with cold suspicion. He demanded to know if Drujinski had the code word. Drujinski leaned forward and asked if Rook meant anything to Lipka. Lipka's reaction was captured on video from surveillance cameras trained on the van. Lipka threw his hands up and his head back in obvious great relief. He breathed out as if he had been holding his breath for 30 years. He confirmed it, stating that Rook was his code name. From that moment, Lipka began to talk. He did not talk freely or easily. Drujinski would later say it was like pulling teeth every time they met. Nevertheless, he talked. Over the next months, they met approximately 12 times. They met in different locations on different days, always in Lipka's van or in hotel rooms. This was always with Federal Bureau of Investigation surveillance recording everything. Lipka described how he had smuggled documents out of the National Security Agency. He described hiding them inside his shirt, wrapped around his legs and under his hat. Security personnel never searched bodies. He also described using dead drops in parks, restaurant bathrooms, and other public locations. These were places where packages could be left and retrieved. He described his meetings with Ivan, his Committee for State Security handler. He described the payments he had received, ranging from $500 to $1,000 per delivery. The total amount was approximately $27,000 over 2 years. He talked about why he had quit in 1967. His reasons included fear of getting caught and greed for more money. The Committee for State Security would not pay him more. He had also told them a lie about being a double agent. Drujinski, playing his role as Sergei Nikitin, expressed sympathy. The Russian Federation understood. Lipka had been young and the Committee for State Security had not compensated him fairly. However, now things could be made right. Drujinski began giving Lipka money through cash payments during their meetings. He gave Lipka $500 one time and $1,000 another time. Over 4 meetings, Drujinski gave Lipka $10,000. Lipka took the money, counted it, and put it in his pocket. He never questioned whether this was real, nor did he suspect it might be a Federal Bureau of Investigation operation. The conversations grew more detailed and more incriminating. Lipka admitted everything, including the documents he had stolen, the information he had compromised, and the damage he had caused. In one particularly chilling exchange, they discussed what would happen if someone exposed Lipka. They considered what might happen if a witness came forward. Lipka suggested he might be willing to eliminate that problem by killing the witness. Drujinski, maintaining his cover, expressed understanding. However, the Federal Bureau of Investigation was recording everything. This included every word, every admission, and every threat. By late 1995, the Federal Bureau of Investigation had enough evidence. Lipka had confessed on tape to espionage. He admitted receiving money from Soviet intelligence. He discussed his methods and operations. This confirmed every detail from Mitrokhin's archive. However, there was one more piece to the investigation. Throughout 1994 and 1995, the Federal Bureau of Investigation conducted physical surveillance of Lipka. They followed him around Lancaster County, documenting his daily routines. They examined his financial records, finding modest assets. These assets could be traced to the payments he had received decades earlier. They reviewed his travel history, which showed no overt foreign trips since 1967. However, it revealed local patterns that matched his historical tradecraft. They even inspected the old dead drop sites near Fort Meade. These were wooded areas and parking lots mentioned in declassified Committee for State Security materials. These were sites where Lipka had left packages for his handlers. They also found witnesses from the 1960s. These people remembered seeing someone matching Lipka's description in those locations. It all checked out, every piece and every detail. By early 1996, prosecutors determined they had sufficient evidence to proceed. The United States Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania prepared the charges. The charges included conspiracy to commit espionage. They also included transferring classified national defense and communications intelligence information to the Soviet Union. The crime had been committed between 1965 and 1967. However, there is no statute of limitations for espionage. It did not matter that 3 decades had passed. Lipka could be prosecuted. He could face life in prison or even the death penalty. On February 23, 1996, the Federal Bureau of Investigation executed the arrest warrant. More than 12 agents and tactical teams surrounded Lipka's home in Millersville. They waited until his 2 young sons left for school, then moved in. At 8:32 in the morning, federal agents were at the door, informing Robert Stephen Lipka he was under arrest. The arrest made national news. A former National Security Agency employee was arrested for Cold War espionage. He had sold secrets to the Soviets 30 years earlier. He was caught in a Federal Bureau of Investigation sting operation. Lipka was taken to federal court in Philadelphia. The magistrate read the charges aloud. These included conspiracy to commit espionage. The maximum penalty was life in prison. A possible death penalty was also an option. Lipka alternately shrugged his shoulders and shook his head as the charges were outlined. He told the magistrate that he did not know any of the people named in the complaint. The formal charges named 3 Confederates. One was Peter Karl Fischer, an East German immigrant. Another was his wife, Ingeborg Elsa Dora Fischer. The third was Artem Petrovich Shokhin, a Soviet citizen. Shokhin had worked at the United Nations in New York from 1965 to 1970. All 3 were KGB agents. Fischer and Shokhin had been Lipka's handlers. However, none of them were charged. They had all returned to Russia. This put them beyond United States jurisdiction. Only Lipka would face justice. The government argued that Lipka was a flight risk. He had evaded capture for 3 decades. Furthermore, he possessed the skills to disappear. The magistrate agreed. Bail was denied. Lipka was taken to the Federal Detention Center in Philadelphia. His second wife, Deborah, told reporters outside the courthouse that her husband was innocent. She claimed he had been set up. She also stated that the government was persecuting him. His 2 sons were confused and frightened. Their father had been arrested. He was accused of being a Soviet spy. The quiet suburban life in Millersville was shattered. The trial was scheduled for later that year. Federal prosecutors built an overwhelming case. They possessed Lipka's recorded confessions to Drudzinski. These included hours of videotape and audio recordings. Vasili Mitrokhin's testimony was another key piece of evidence. The former KGB archivist would fly from Britain to testify. He would speak about the files he had copied. These documents proved Lipka's code name was Rook. They also confirmed the dates and payments. Patricia's testimony was also crucial. She was Lipka's ex-wife. She had observed his suspicious behavior. Patricia had found Soviet maps and notes in their attic after the divorce. She could describe Lipka hiding classified documents during their marriage. The prosecution also had National Security Agency personnel records. They presented security logs. Expert witnesses would explain the classification levels of the documents. They would also detail the damage assessment. This would highlight the value of what Lipka had compromised. The defense, in contrast, had nothing. They offered no credible explanation for why Lipka had confessed to Drudzinski. There was no way to refute Mitrokhin's archive. They also had no answer for the money Lipka received during the sting operation. Lipka's attorney, James M. Farley, knew the case was unwinnable. In December 1996, he approached prosecutors. They discussed a plea deal. The government wanted Lipka to cooperate fully. This included providing a complete damage assessment. He would detail everything he had stolen. This meant every document and every operation. He also needed to confirm the information in Mitrokhin's archive. In exchange, they would recommend a reduced sentence. This would not be life in prison. It would be a substantial amount of time, but not the maximum penalty. Lipka had a critical choice to make. He could face trial with overwhelming evidence, risking life in prison or even the death penalty. Alternatively, he could plead guilty. This would mean cooperating, accepting responsibility, and receiving a reduced sentence. On May 15, 1997, Robert Stephen Lipka stood in federal court in Philadelphia. Judge Marvin Katz presided over the proceedings. The courtroom was packed. It held members of the media. National Security Agency representatives were present. Federal Bureau of Investigation agents who had worked the case were also there. Victims of Lipka's espionage, whose identities could not be revealed, were also in attendance. Prosecutor Barbara Cohen stood at the podium. She told the court that the case involved a man who sold out his country. He had betrayed his oath. He had also compromised the national security of the United States for money. Cohen emphasized that it was pure greed, nothing more noble or complex. Lipka sold classified information to the Soviet Union because he wanted cash. Cohen then detailed the charges. Between September 1965 and August 1967, Lipka conspired with agents of the Soviet Union. His goal was to obtain and deliver classified national defense information. He personally removed top-secret documents from the National Security Agency. He photographed these documents. He then delivered them to KGB officers. In return, he received approximately $27,000 in payment. The information he compromised revealed several critical areas. These included National Security Agency signals, intelligence capabilities. It also exposed American eavesdropping programs. Communication security vulnerabilities were made public. Furthermore, order of battle information was compromised. This was intelligence that went directly to the White House. The damage was severe. The betrayal was complete. Judge Katz then asked Lipka if he understood the charges. Lipka replied that he did. The judge then asked if he understood the penalties. Lipka again affirmed his understanding. Finally, Judge Katz asked how he pleaded. Lipka's voice was quiet but clear. He said one word, guilty. The word hung in the courtroom. It echoed the culmination of 30 years. For 3 decades, he had believed he had escaped justice. He had even built a new life. Now he was guilty. The plea agreement required Lipka to cooperate with government debriefings. Over the following weeks, he met with Federal Bureau of Investigation counterintelligence specialists. He also met with National Security Agency damage assessment teams. Furthermore, he met with prosecutors. He provided details about his espionage activities. He confirmed information from Mitrokhin's archive. Lipka also described the documents he had stolen. He detailed the methods he had used. Finally, he revealed the contacts he had made. The debriefings revealed the full scope of what he had compromised. According to classified damage assessments, Lipka had provided the Soviets with critical intelligence. This concerned United States signals collection capabilities. The documents he had stolen allowed Soviet cryptographers to understand how the National Security Agency was breaking their codes. This information also allowed Soviet military planners to adjust their communications security. Moreover, it enabled Soviet intelligence to counter American eavesdropping operations worldwide. The damage could not be fully quantified. Some secrets once revealed can never be recovered. Some intelligence advantages once lost can never be regained. The National Security Agency had to assume everything Lipka had accessed was compromised. The agency had to change its procedures. They had to upgrade security and rebuild their capabilities. The cost ran into millions of dollars. The strategic disadvantage lasted years. On September 15, 1997, Lipka returned to federal court for sentencing. Judge Katz had reviewed several documents. These included the presentencing reports. He also considered the cooperation statements and the damage assessments. The plea agreement recommended 18 years in federal prison. Judge Katz had the discretion to impose more or less time. He looked at Lipka standing before him. Lipka was a 52-year-old man. He had sold his country's secrets when he was 19. He had lived free for 3 decades. His capture resulted from his ex-wife, a defector, and a brilliant Federal Bureau of Investigation sting. Judge Katz spoke directly to Lipka. He stated that Lipka's actions had threatened the national security of the United States. This occurred during one of the most dangerous periods of the Cold War. Judge Katz emphasized that Lipka betrayed his oath. He betrayed his fellow soldiers. He also betrayed the American people, all for money. For $30,000, Lipka sold secrets that took years to develop. These secrets cost millions to protect. Judge Katz declared there was no excuse for what Lipka did. There was no justification or mitigation beyond his cooperation now, 3 decades late. The sentence was 18 years in federal prison. This would be followed by 3 years of supervised release. Lipka was ordered to report to the Bureau of Prisons immediately. Lipka showed no emotion. He did not speak. He did not offer an apology. He was then led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. He returned to the detention center. From there, he was transferred to federal prison. His sons were teenagers at the time. They visited him occasionally over the years. These were short visits filled with awkward conversations. What does one say to a father who is a convicted spy? His second wife, Deborah, filed for divorce while he was incarcerated. Another marriage was destroyed by espionage. Another family was shattered by betrayal. Lipka served his sentence at various federal facilities. These included medium security prisons. He was a model prisoner. He kept to himself. He caused no trouble and followed all the rules. The years passed slowly. By 2012, he was released from federal prison. This occurred after serving 15 years. He had received credit for good behavior. He had served most of his sentence. By then, he was 67 years old. He returned to Pennsylvania, specifically to Lancaster County. This was the same area where he had been arrested 16 years earlier. However, everything had changed. His second wife was gone. His sons were adults with their own lives. His coin shop was long closed. His reputation was destroyed. He was known as a convicted Soviet spy, a traitor, and a betrayer. He lived in a small apartment. He survived on Social Security. He kept a low profile and avoided attention. The Federal Bureau of Investigation maintained periodic contact. They checked on him regularly. They ensured he was not violating the terms of his supervised release. They also made sure he was not attempting to contact foreign intelligence services. However, Lipka was done. He was tired and old. The fire that had driven him to betray his country for money had burned out decades earlier. On July 19, 2013, Robert Stephen Lipka died. He was 68 years old. He was living in Meadeville, Pennsylvania. This was about 2 hours north of his former home in Millersville. The cause of his death was not widely reported. He died quietly, without fanfare or redemption. His obituary did not mention the espionage. It did not mention his 18-year prison sentence. Furthermore, it did not mention that he had been one of the most damaging Soviet spies in National Security Agency history. It listed his survivors, including his sons and his siblings. His former wives were not mentioned. The damage he had caused was not calculated. He was cremated. There was no public memorial service. There was also no grave marker. His ashes were simply scattered somewhere in Pennsylvania. This marked a quiet end to a life defined by betrayal. However, the consequences of his actions lasted far longer than his life. The intelligence he provided to the KGB in the mid-1960s gave the Soviets crucial insights into American signals intelligence capabilities. It forced the National Security Agency to overhaul security procedures. It also cost the United States strategic advantages in the Cold War. The case also revealed critical vulnerabilities in the American intelligence system. How could a 19-year-old Army clerk walk out of the most secure intelligence facility in America with top-secret documents hidden under his uniform? How did he do it for 2 years without detection? How did he receive $50,000 in 1960s currency? How did he then walk away clean and live free for 3 decades? The answers forced significant changes throughout the intelligence community. These included body searches at high-security facilities. Random polygraph examinations became standard. Financial monitoring of personnel with security clearances was implemented. Continuous evaluation programs were also introduced. The Lipka case became a training scenario. It served as a warning. It provided an example of what happens when greed meets opportunity. It also showed what occurs when security becomes complacent. Finally, it highlighted what happens when a young soldier decides his oath means less than cash. The case also demonstrated the value of defectors. Without Vasili Mitrokhin's incredible archive, Lipka would never have been caught. The KGB files were buried in a Moscow garden. They were smuggled to Britain in 1992. These files exposed dozens of Soviet agents. Among them were Aldrich Ames, Robert Hansen, and Robert Lipka. These 3 were among the most damaging spies in American history. All of them were identified through Mitrokhin's painstaking 12-year effort to copy secret files. The archive proved that patience and documentation could defeat even the most careful espionage operations. It showed that secrets buried for decades could still be uncovered. It also demonstrated that justice, though delayed, could still be served. For the Federal Bureau of Investigation agents who worked the case, the Lipka investigation represented a triumph of patient counterintelligence work. John Whiteside spent 3 years building the case. This ranged from the initial library research to finding Patricia. It also included orchestrating the undercover operation with Drujinski. The false flag operation was brilliant. The chess piece guess was inspired. The dozens of recorded meetings with Lipka provided overwhelming evidence. The case became a model for how to investigate historical espionage. For Patricia, Robert Lipka's ex-wife, the case brought a form of closure. She had long suspected many things during their marriage. She found documents in their attic, including Soviet maps and notes in Cyrillic. His strange behavior and unexplained money also raised her concerns. All of her suspicions proved to be real. She had been right to be suspicious. She was right to be afraid. She was right to divorce him and start a new life. When the Federal Bureau of Investigation came to her door in 1993, she finally had an opportunity to tell the truth. This allowed her to expose what her former husband had done. It helped bring him to justice. The FBI protected her identity throughout the investigation and trial. She never had to testify in open court. She never had to face Lipka again. She watched from a distance as he was arrested and then prosecuted. He was convicted and later sentenced. After this, she moved on with her life. For the intelligence community, the Lipka case served as a stark reminder. Espionage cases never truly close. Spies who escape detection might be exposed decades later. Defectors, archives, and patient investigation can reach back through time. Betrayal always leaves traces, even after 30 years. The case also highlighted the importance of historical counterintelligence. The Federal Bureau of Investigation maintains files on unsolved espionage cases going back decades. These cold cases remain open. When new information surfaces, such as from defectors, declassified documents, or witness cooperation, those cases are reactivated. They are investigated with modern techniques. Sometimes these investigations are resolved with arrests and prosecutions. Lipka thought he had escaped. He thought the passage of time had made him safe. He believed he could live out his life without consequences. He was wrong. Time does not erase espionage. Distance does not create immunity. Greed does not justify betrayal. So what can we learn from the Robert Lipka case? First, access without accountability is dangerous. Lipka was 19 years old. He had a top-secret clearance. He handled the most classified documents in the United States government. Nobody watched him closely enough. No one noticed when documents went missing. No one questioned how a teenager could afford expensive purchases on an Army salary. The security culture that allowed Lipka to operate has been fundamentally reformed. However, the lesson remains relevant. Trust must be verified. Access must be monitored. Security must be continuous. Second, greed is a powerful motivator. Lipka was not ideological. He did not believe in communism. He did not hate America. He just wanted money. He received $500 at a time, or $1,000 per package. He collected $27,000 total. In today's money, this amounts to roughly $200,000. That is what he sold American national security for. That is what he thought his country was worth. Understanding financial motivations remains crucial in counterintelligence. Personnel with unexplained wealth are red flags. Employees living beyond their means are warning signs. These situations present opportunities for foreign intelligence services. Third, cooperation from witnesses matters. Patricia's information was crucial. She had seen things during their marriage. She remembered specific details and provided corroboration. Without her cooperation, the case would have been much harder to prove. The intelligence community now emphasizes the importance of reporting suspicious behavior. This applies even years later, even after relationships end, and even when you are not completely sure. If you see something, report it. The consequences of silence are too great. Fourth, patient investigation works. The Federal Bureau of Investigation spent 3 years building this case. This period spanned from Mitrokhin's defection in 1992 to Lipka's arrest in 1996. This involved 3 years of research, witness interviews, surveillance, and undercover operations. They did not rush or take shortcuts. They built an overwhelming case. When they arrested Lipka, he had no way out. He had no defense and no escape. That patience paid off with a guilty plea and full cooperation. Finally, justice delayed is still justice. Lipka got away with espionage for 30 years. He lived free, raised families, and operated a business. He believed he was safe. However, his crimes eventually caught up with him. The evidence surfaced. The investigation resumed. The arrest happened. He went to prison. He died with the label of a convicted Soviet spy. The message is clear. If you betray your country, you will never be truly safe. The FBI never stops looking. The cases never truly close. Justice, however long it takes, will eventually find you. The story of Robert Lipka is ultimately a story about choices. A 19-year-old soldier had a choice. He could serve his country honorably or sell secrets for cash. He chose cash. He chose betrayal. He chose 30 years of looking over his shoulder. He also chose 30 years of waiting for the knock on the door. Those 30 years ended in a courtroom in Philadelphia with a single word: guilty. The lesson for all of us is simple. The choices we make define our lives. The betrayals we commit follow us forever. The secrets we think are buried have a way of surfacing. This can happen in Soviet archives, in attics, or through the files of a dedicated defector who spent 12 years copying them. Additionally, these secrets may resurface in the memory of an ex-wife who never forgot what she saw. If you found this story fascinating, please hit that like button. It helps the algorithm show this video to more people who appreciate deep dives into Cold War espionage. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. These are real cases with real spies and real consequences. Please drop a comment below. Did you know about Robert Lipka before watching this video? Were you surprised he got away with it for 30 years? What do you think about the Federal Bureau of Investigation's chess piece guess that cracked the case? Please also check out the next video on screen. It is another incredible true story about a spy who thought they had gotten away with it. This individual believed time and distance had made them safe. However, they learned that betrayal never expires. Thank you for watching. Remember, in the world of espionage, the cases never truly close. The files never stop being investigated. Justice, however delayed, always finds its target.